Hello and welcome everyone. I hope you had time to join us during that intro video. I'm Camilla Bullock and I lead the Emerging Payments Association in Asia. And I'm absolutely delighted that you have time to join us on such a short notice. It's not even a week since, what number saying? It sounds low, but 8.5 million devices were taken out about an outage that's been debated if it's the biggest outage ever. And today we're going to talk about what was the impact, what was the direct impact, where was it, and how did it impact payments specifically, and also what does this mean for the future? So the Emerging Payments Association Asia is a leading association for innovative businesses in the Asia payments ecosystem. And we are a community of anyone who moves and assists the movement of money, payment service provider, banks, card schemes, platforms, and tech. And we host discussions like this. We host think tanks and networking events, and we provide members with insight while influencing policy regulation and representing APAC in international forums. And security is one of the things that we often come back to. It needs to be that balance between innovation and security. And just last week, we have this alarm bell of what can happen and how quickly we can sit there and think, how far is it? How far will it impact? And this time, it wasn't a security. It wasn't a cyber attack, which many people feared in those first minutes or first hours, actually. I thought it was just the upstairs office and my husband had the blue screen. And then I was on the phone to one of the panelists today, Mei Lam, and she said that it was actually a global outage. And we had a very quick chat about that. But that's when I had this idea that let's just bring the global payments leader together and talk about what this actually was. And EPAA are delighted that we have a brain trust that goes wide and deep. And on short notice, I was able to bring some of the most influential payments leaders globally to debate this topic. So I'm going to introduce them to you. So we have Mei Lam, who I already referred to. She's the chair of the Emerging Payments Association Asia's advisory board, which is also the CIO for AP Plus in Australia, which is the Instant Payments Network. From US, we have Peter Tapling. Peter is the board member on US Faster Payments Council, among many other things, which most of those participants you will see today, they might add to the biographers because they've done so many things, are inactive in a lot of different organizations. Then we have from Singapore, Rahul Bagar. He is an APA ambassador, but he also is the Global Payments Advisor and Director at Avivialt. I hope I got that right. And he is ex-SWIFT, so he knows a lot about the reach of global payments. And last but not least, we have Sakat Mandal from HSBC. He is a senior product manager for cross-border, cross-currency leads and Asia Pacific Global Payments Solutions. So a mix of all different backgrounds. Then we also have David Birds calling. He's going to represent UK and the whole of Europe, David. I thought that that's one for you. And as the other participants, David wears many hats. He is the principal at 15MB and the director of consultant Hyperion. He speaks on conferences globally, so many of you have probably met him before. So welcome. Let's kick it off with just how did you experience this outage and what was your first thoughts? So I'm going to turn to May and she can speak from the Australian perspective.
Thanks, Camilla. So hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. So I think the first one is like, I actually thought that it was a cyber attack because knowing that it was in the middle of the meeting, someone just said, oh, gone. And then messaged me, I have full screen. I thought, oh, maybe it's something and then just happening. And then at the same time that like I was immediately like Googling what's happening and I couldn't find anything because it was, I remember it was 3:11 p.m. in Australia time. So the first reaction was like that's a cyber attack, and then very quickly that from my company perspective, AP Plus, that is triggering there was an incident in the cyber. And then within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it started to say that it's a global issue. And it was quite experienced, because we did prepare from the payment perspective. The first thing is like, what is the impact? Who's going to impact? What's the communication? So I think I can get into the detail of it. But the first reaction, it was a cyber attack. But that's a lot of learning. For today, really keen to unpack further. I think the first thing that it's now still doing the PIR collectively as an industry, and what is the definition of resilience? And when it comes to payment, I really want to say that it is a network asset. So it's not just the infrastructure in the central, but it's every single player in the ecosystem does play a role to it.
Yeah, and it's almost a little bit that, I know, like the delayed effect, like when it hits us now, where does it come next? But I can Saket for the bank view from, I didn't say Saket, you're based in Hong Kong, is that correct? Yeah. Yeah, perfect. So what was your thoughts, and what happened that the first couple of hours?
Very similar to what May mentioned here. So initially, a few users here and there, they're reporting this blue screen. And just like me, our initial response was, is something wrong with our own assets? We didn't realize that this is a global issue and not HSBC issue, right? So, but within half an hour or something, we got the report that this is not specific to HSBC. Having said that, HSBC being HSBC, we have our own incident management protocols in place, which immediately kicked into effect, even without knowing whether it's a global issue or not. Because in payment processing, we just cannot rely on primary systems, right? As soon as something goes wrong with primary systems, our secondary and tertiary systems takes into place. So while we got to know about the details, but because of our backup arrangement and everything, to be honest, the immediate impact on payment processing was very isolated, very limited. Having said that, because of the various currency clearing cutoffs that we work on, there were incidents where we missed cutoff because of some IT asset was temporarily down. So there was impact, but not a lot, actually, Camilla.
Were you at this point in time, did you have this like in your stomach, like, or is this under control, or have I actually, because that's what I think a little bit, have I realized the full impact?
No, it took us at least, I would say, a couple of hours to realize that we are actually in control, because till then, a lot of things were unknown, right? So we didn't know that whether it's a few users only or one of our core servers can also get impacted, go down. Those kind of uncertainty was definitely around, but it took us a few hours to get all the assurance that no, things are under control, while temporarily outages is happening, but immediately the backup servers are taking over. So it took us some time, Camilla, but initial couple of hours were a bit anxious, to be honest.
Let's shift over the ocean and some land and see for the early morning in UK, David. What was your reaction?
Actually, I was actually in New York last week when this happened. So I woke up and I saw the kind of news alert on my phone saying all the banks are down, all the airlines are down and this kind of thing. So I have the same mental checklist whenever I see something like this. I just quickly run through from like the least likely to the most likely. Like I look at it like, okay, is it going to be some completely unexpected, unplanned for, impossible, that we could never have seen this, like a solar flare has come and knocked out all the satellites or something. So that's the least likely. And then is it, the actions of a hostile foreign power? I mean, it could be, that's a possibility, but it's quite hard to kind of organize this sort of thing. Or is it going to be management incompetence somewhere along the line? And it's, generally speaking, these things are management incompetence. So in fact, it'll be quite a happy day in the world of computer security when agents of foreign powers overtake management incompetence as the main form of cyber attack. So then just the question comes like, okay, so whose management has been incompetent? And, in reality, it only took about a few minutes before people realized this is CrowdStrike at the heart of all of this. So actually within a few minutes, it went from, oh my God, it could be World War III to, oh, actually, how do you get around this? Because you can't just go and manually reboot all the machines. So what's the recovery plan for? And of course, I wasn't thinking about payments at that point. I was just thinking about, oh man, I'm going to be stuck in New York. This is great. I love it. So I wasn't that bothered.
I'll come to when I thought about it. It
Wasn't that
payments,
bothered.
it could be worse places to be stuck. So Peter is also like a little bit south from New York, then, like 8 hours.
Yes, west from New York. I'm in Chicago. Hello, everyone. And I think, well, first of all, I represent the U.S. Faster Payments Council, which does not operate any payment services. So we had no direct effect. Certainly, when things happened, most of the United States was asleep. Interestingly, the way this attack occurred is not attack. The way this outage occurred was it was an update to a control file, and that update would take effect on the next boot of a system. And it turns out that in the United States, between 11 o'clock at night and 2 o'clock in the morning, people reboot their systems to get all the updates. And so it was both timed poorly for the United States, which caused some challenges. And remember, it only affected Windows systems. So those very stable mainframe systems that are running your ACH systems, et cetera, were largely unaffected. And if you look at things like some of the companies that have been affected for a much longer term, where they're affected is not in the core systems, and Delta Airlines has been in the headlines. So I don't want to pick on Delta, but they have been in the headlines. And the system that's causing them problems is not their flight management systems or anything like that. It's the system that gets used to schedule pilots and flight attendants. And so it's these systems around the outside that are based on Windows where these problems become prevalent. And David commented that you're not going to run around to touch every machine to do an update. And in fact, that's one of the resolutions of this is do a boot from a USB device, which means physically you have to be next to every machine. So I was not personally directly affected because I was thankfully sleeping.
It's interesting when we start to talk about that systems around, and I'm going to come to you, Rahul, but I also called my friends in Indonesia and Thailand and invited them to come and speak on this webinar, and they said, we have nothing to report. We didn't see anything about it. And I thought that was a bit eye-opening for me. And I saw earlier today also a list of what organizations were actually impacted, and that the picture starts to emerge. But I'm going to go to Rahul and see, was it a thing in Singapore?
That's an interesting comment you just made, Camilla, right? So there's news around how China and Indonesia, for example, were not affected at all largely. But Singapore was very interesting. So I was actually out at a lunch meeting, incidentally, and with a fellow payment geek, and we were talking. And at the end of a lunch, we suddenly got these news suddenly coming that there's a problem at the airport. I think that those pictures are the first that we saw. And then it kind of blew up into a global issue where you find there's obviously issues with some parking lots in Singapore. There's some ride-hailing services not working, and people not clear what's happening. So I think the first interaction, or the first emotion was there's definitely something wrong, and we're hoping it's not the worst, right? But very quickly, and I think this is a testament to the way Singapore operates, right? The public agencies here were really on the ball. So we had announcements coming very quickly from the MAS, from the Ministry of Digital Development and Information, the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, and all of them clearly saying, one, it's not a security incident or cyber attack, calm down. Two, it's a major IT incident, yes. Three, essential services in Singapore, government services, hospitals, local banks, even hospitals, all working. The underlying payments infrastructure is working. And MAS came out and said, well, there is a slight problem with, for example, the trade infrastructure, the SGX, post-trade processes. So they will extend the MEPS plus the RTGS operating hours by 2 hours that day, just to ensure, any inefficiencies are covered. But really speaking, they did a full run of the ecosystem and ensured that market infrastructures were up and running. And at the same time, banks' health was also confirmed. The banks did face some issues in terms of internal systems, but no major critical systems were affected. So all that on day one was present. And experience-wise, I didn't have any problems. I could access my account, my balances, my payments, cards are working, everything was working. So I was not affected. So very quickly, I think it went from a World War III scenario to, by the end of the day, it was more like, okay, so you go to a coffee, you go to a cafe and you order a cup of coffee, and your card doesn't get processed for some reason, right? Now, when that happens, you can think of any disaster scenarios, but the guy just reboots the machine, puts your card back again, and just works, right? It kind of diluted that very quickly. I'll stop there. There's a lot more to uncover there, but that was my feeling on day one.
So it's interesting because you talk about lunch. For me, it was dinner because we couldn't pay in the supermarket. And it's 2 big supermarkets in Australia, and one of them you couldn't pay, you needed cash. And we had seriously no cash in the house. So it turned into that discussion about necessities. And I think that's been a little bit a theme in Australia, May. Do you think we might have long-term effects from this? Yes, because of that realization, I actually can't buy my dinner tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I think that at the end of the day is that how payment actually impacting the day-to-day life. I think it was last year that AusPayNet had a summit, and they have a great debate. They talk about cash or no cash, and I think that is ongoing. And I think that is the one thing that we will turn into like what is the electronic payment and the resilience. So I really want to call out the resilience perspective. It is a payment, it is a network asset. Whether it is card payment or account-to-account payment, it is a network asset. So it's when they talk about resilience and the backup, and also what's a plan B, it needs the holistic ecosystem to come together and look at that. So I think that does have an impact of that. And definitely from Australia perspective, we are looking at like a different level of how we can have the different fallback and how can we communicate. And in case of the crisis, if it is really a crisis, how do we actually come together and collaborate, not pointing fingers and sharing the information? I think that sharing the information is key because it can touch the commercial element as well. So how can we have that trust? How can we build the trust muscle in the payment ecosystem? So at times like this, we can actually share information in a timely manner.
It's interesting that trust word is so big in what direction you take it. So you talk about trust in the ecosystem to help out in terms of crisis. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So, so many different avenues I can go down here, but let's just stay a little bit around resilience before we go in sort of different payments methods and future on that. So anybody else that would add on this? Is that payments resilient? Yeah, go Peter.
So, in modern payment times, we can't help but have conversations about central bank digital currencies. And there's a certain person based in the UK who always talks about the offline problem. You need to be able to solve the problem of what happens when you do not have access. And in this particular case, we had electrons, so power existed, but we did not have access to the network in spotty situations. And so one of the things that Cash offered at the one grocery store that would take it, even though you didn't have any, Camilla, was that Cash works offline. We can go ahead and settle our debts independent of any systems or whatever, and when they come back online, things will work. And so I think that having the ability as we rely more and more on digital technology, we just assume it will always work. And not being able to get my coffee in the morning might be a bit of an inconvenience. But for some people, not being able to eat dinner that night, that's pretty significant. And so I think that we will revisit this idea of being able to work offline. Prior to everybody having cards on their mobile phones, we used to have the knuckle busters, right? Where they'd take your card and they'd impress it, create an impression off the embossed card. And while we look back at that and say, oh my gosh, what a terrible system, it worked when there was no power.
It's an ongoing conversation, the online and offline. So I'm going to go to David, but not yet. David, hold your thought on that, because I want to hear what Saket says about resilience and also the trust in the ecosystem. Does it resonate to you what May is saying? Would you share your findings in in the crisis? Was it discussions ongoing with other counterparts or competitors?
Absolutely. The word that May used, trust. And also to go what Peter was suggesting around online versus offline. We have to look at it from the end consumer perspective also, right? Offline is an option, carrying cash. You ask a teenager today, when they go out of the home, they only carry their phone. They don't carry anything else. So while online versus offline, we can always debate it, but from a consumer perspective, if I look at it, then I have to go back to what you referred to on the resilience part, as well as the trust in the overall ecosystem, that how we build this up, right? Now, when this incident happened, and nowadays, in social media, very soon, some meme will come out. So I clearly remember there was a meme which came out where there was a massive structure sitting somewhere. It was looking very solid from the front, but on the back side, there was a small brick which was actually holding the whole structure. You remove the brick, it goes down. So this CrowdStrike kind of reminded of something similar. Now, what it tells us as a service provider to our customers, we cannot have that single brick holding the whole infrastructure. If we have that scenario, we have to have a resilience coming into picture. Now, resilience plan coming into picture. Now, if I have to remove that brick, can I do it alone? No, that brick, I don't know, in the whole tech supply chain, where is a small company sitting somewhere is providing such a crucial software to the big guys, which nobody is even aware of, right? I think 80% of the people learn CrowdStrike on that day, right? What is it and what it provides for, right? Now, if you have to remove dependency and prepare parallel support resilience structure somewhere, that's where this ecosystem trust comes into picture, right? It's not only about like everybody should only be dependent on, say, Windows, and they will be in turn be dependent on one specific supplier for this particular. Now, this is where we have to come together and look at it from the consumer perspective also, that yes, we can debate on online versus offline, but our consumer are asking for online. So we need to have that resilience into our system so that we can consistently meet their demand.
Yeah, segueing straight over to David here, because that the online and offline, and also it taking us into the digital world. I know you have lots of thoughts on that. So what's your thinking here?
Well, I mean, Peter knows what I so obviously I think if we're going to have CBDC, it has to work offline. There's no point having a CBDC that doesn't work offline. The whole point of having it is that it will have a separate infrastructure. So as a society, we end up with two paths. You have, I can pay you through the bank and banking networks, or I can pay you over the internet, and they don't run on the same rails. That's what we want. Now, and actually consumers may never see this, because I can easily imagine when you walk into Woolies in 10 years time, you put your palm on something and walk out, and whether it's an 8583 pull or a 222 push or CBDC over the internet, you won't know, because you're a normal person and you won't care. Like, so what? The money comes out of your bank account, ends up in their bank account. You don't care what path it takes. So I think it pushes us and it reminds us, that if we're going to have central bank digital currency, it has to be offline, device to device. It has to work when there's no power, no mobile network. I should still be able to go around to the store and buy some milk. It has other implications on the cash side, though, because I don't think cash is the resilient backup you think it is. And that's for two reasons. So one is, first of all, if it's the POS terminals that go down, that's one thing. But if it's the POSs that go down, in a lot of stores, they can't sell you anything. If the POS is out, because they can't do the stock and the reconciliation, and so even if the payment works, they still can't sell you anything if the POS is down, and actually they may not even be able to open the cash drawer. But also in some circumstances, it's the other way around. I remember reading detailed case studies of the Japanese tsunami, where it was the people with cash that were screwed because the cash got washed out to sea along with their houses. And the people who had mobile phones were fine because the base stations went up within a couple of hours. And in fact, in the floods in China last year, they put the base stations in drones and just put up a couple of drones, and Alipay and WeChat were back up again. So it's not as simple as saying, well, cash is the backup and we have to keep cash. It's more complex than that. But from a payments point of view, I agree with Peter. Yeah. The key thing to learn from a payments perspective is we need central bank digital currency that works on completely different rails and has nothing to do with the banking system.
And you see a little bit of that resilience by distribution in the point of sale payments experiences. So point of sale didn't work in some places, but it did work in other places because those point of sale devices were based on different systems.
Yes.
And so to the point that was brought up earlier by Sekat, we are generally not running parallel systems for the front end payments capabilities. And I think we're going to revisit that. You know, in the United States government, we have something called Sole Survivor, which is when we have State of the Union addresses and things like that, they take one member of cabinet, put them at a different location so that if something terrible happens, we still have continuation of government. And so today, we think of updating our systems, and people have been trained who are doing systems maintenance. Let's get everything on the same release at the same time so we know exactly where we stand. And I think we're going to have to begin thinking about schemes where we update almost everything, and there's something sitting in the back end that doesn't get updated until I'm certain that the new thing is working.
That sounds
That-
like a spreadsheet that
Yeah.
runs that never gets changed in the bank. But
I want to add the
It
point
may,
in
yeah,
terms of
yeah,
the cash
may
and then the point of sale is not whether cash is relevant or not. It's that's the backup. So what is the BCP? So the business continuity plan. So looking at using Hong Kong airport as example, the disruption was low because they can very quickly revert to the menu of check-in and menu of the custom. Hence that the disruption is low. So it's like from the payment perspective, what would be our BCP? And can the network ecosystem can stand in for each other and help each other during the crisis?
I'm a bit surprised about the lack of those backup measures because, you know, here I probably on average once a week in the UK, there'll be a story that says, you know, nobody could pay in Sainsbury's today because, you know, the card networks went down or somebody unplugged the switch to do the vacuuming or something. You know, it's, every week you see a story like this. And I do kind of wonder, well, like, if you're in a, like if you're the manager of a Starbucks or something, why don't you have an iZettle or an Adyen or on your mobile phone? I mean, like, you know, for the once every N years when the system goes down, can't you just take out your mobile phone and take payments through that? I mean, these backups, it doesn't seem that complex to have a backup plan, like make sure the store manager has a mobile phone. I mean, I don't think that's asking the earth. So, you know, I mean, maybe these people just have the wrong consultants. That's all I can imagine.
Oh, it sounds odd that it's down once a week. We might have to send some of our
But
consultants.
just for the record, like in Australia, all the payments from the center perspective is all up, even though the experience
Yeah.
like may has been seen is done. So hence that back to the network. So it's a
And yet
configuration.
all the layers
yeah,
around it.
yeah.
But
yeah.
Rahul, I know Singapore has done some built-in resilience in systems. Can you just address that a little bit? And
Yeah.
in that, if you can talk about the brick, is it the brick scenario that Sekat was referring to, that it might be resilience, but it's dependent on one vendor concentration, let's call it that?
Okay. But let's talk about Singapore for a moment, right? So I think that over time, the entire payments infrastructure overhauling that's happened in this country, it's definitely created fragmentation as well as, you know, multiple layers of resilience, and that's because of optionality. Right? So at one level, if you're looking at the brick and mortar POS example, you essentially have you know, the card systems which are available, and 95% plus of Singapore consumers use credit or debit cards for payments. So that essentially ensured that there was one running, you know, option available at the POS level. The uptake of the FAST system here for account payments for the instant payment service is really high again. So the use of mobile wallets on top of that is again a, you know, great testament to how people have kind of advanced over the past few years. So with the use of QR codes, with the use of, you know, Pay Now, all that, and with the banks innovating on top of that, and non-banks innovating on top of that, there's a lot of optionality essentially. So the failure point, you know, risk kind of reduces and diminishes a bit when you have multiple options and used by the consumers. At the other end, you know, MEPS Plus and the RTGS obviously has multiple layers of resiliency built in, and you have essentially another infrastructure layer which is sitting and kind of you know, solving for all that. At the same time, you know, the ambition here is not to be like cashless tomorrow. It's to go towards less cash. And I think cash is always an option, right? So that's still in use. 15% of consumers roughly use it as per stats. So all this kind of provides an ecosystem where you would carry, like $20 now maybe, or, less in your wallet, but you have in your phone at least 3 options, and in your watch maybe another couple, so that you can actually pay at a particular point of sale. So that kind of protects a lot of the resiliency issues essentially by giving optionality, and it's supported by the infrastructure layers. So that's kind of one major, I think, supporting factor here in this country. And in terms of, I would say overall, no, I think don't have any comments on the concentration aspect, to be honest. But I think it'll be an interesting one to watch on how things progress and how it moves forward from Brink's perspective. Yeah.
You think? No, I think it's often hard to uncover before something happens if that concentration sits when it's a private company. It's almost how good was that salesperson or CrowdStrike, not so successful in certain market, but very successful in US.
True.
David, I think you wanted to add something to this. Is that right?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that, just to follow on that point about looking at alternatives. I think it's possible maybe in kind of modern business in some way we don't necessarily empower the frontline staff to respond to these things in this kind of way, because if you're selling, I mean, it doesn't apply to supermarkets obviously, but in lots of other circumstances, I mean, if I was selling you some furniture or something, and the POS system goes down, I wouldn't really care. I mean, I would just take a picture of your card and do a manual key entry later on. I mean, it's not a big deal. I mean, I know who you are. I can take a copy of your driver's license, or like a little bit more responsibility push down to the frontline staff can get around a lot of these things. It doesn't solve the problem in Coles, but in a lot of places it would solve the problem.
This comes back to this, like having the plan. I think what we touched a bit, having the plan and clear communication. I mean, communication is key always when something unexpected is happening.
Yeah,
and as you say, empowering. Yeah, Peter, please.
As David and I will do once in a while, we're going to argue. I don't think this is the kind of thing that you can push all the way down to the frontline staff who is running a cash register. I mean, at the end of the day, when something like that happens, and I'm working at a coffee shop and I'm 18 years old, I'm like, yay, I get the day off. Like, I'm out. Like, I'm not trying to think about continuation of operations. I do think that frontline in IT definitely needs to know what has to happen. Should the manager at a Starbucks have an alternative, or at least go to one class a year that tells them what to do when this happens? Yes, I agree with that. But I think pushing it all the way down to the front end, we in the payment systems are going to have to figure out how this resilience works and how we have plan Bs. And using David's palm reader payment mechanism, I'm the consumer, I don't care, just make it happen. Yes, we need to be thinking about how do we make that work. If I have a store, do I run 15 Windows POS terminals in one Linux-based POS terminal as an example, so that I can always do payments? Possibly, but again, every one of those elements you add to a situation adds cost that gets compounded with maintenance and training.
Oh gosh, I do. When I used to sell trading machines, and they said you need to have a disaster recovery site within the extra 10 system, that was a really good quarter for me. Well, bang, you sold system like that, even if you priced them half price. But that's a different story. But actually leading into how some people always capitalize on crisis. And we're looking in news and seeing this, like, as often fraud stories come out. Fake site trying to capitalize on this crisis where you weren't you able to be paid, call this number and so on. Just want to see if anybody have heard specific materializing fraud stories that could again impact the trust into the future. So Rahul, you're nodding a bit. Has this come up somewhere?
Yeah, I was just hearing the comments, and I think out of all this, the biggest risk that I saw, an actual risk that came out and manifested, right, was actually a phishing attack that happened. And I think it was not only Singapore, it was probably global in a sense, but definitely it was highlighted in Singapore. So this is where bad actors essentially started sending out phishing messages saying, this is the way now to solve your problem. Here's the script, run it now, and it'll solve all your wonderful problems on your system, right? And now this is where the elements of the front line, middle line, and back line really, starts mattering. Now, when that happens, people may take knee-jerk reactions because it's a fact that your operations have stopped or whatever. So education is so important, awareness is so important, and again, that phishing scam was essentially put up by the agencies in Singapore. It was pretty much well communicated across the board, but I'm sure there were bad actors who got away with something. So that's a very important aspect of how far you go down the line, actually, to educate even on these aspects in a crisis where you'll be definitely being attacked. And especially financial institutions need to be more aware. Payment operators and payment institutions need to be more aware of these aspects. So yeah.
Yeah, I want to add on that one too. So during that first 2 hours, I have so many SMS. Like, I don't know who they are, just offering help. Here's the link. Here's the link. Like, they could be the spyware, the malware, and things that's to whose point is phishing and scamming things. But I think that's now that what we're going to see, I think the coming months are two things. One is that globally, the bad actors know who use Microsoft plus CrowdStrike. And if they want to make it vulnerable, that is the target. So that's first. And the second thing is that during the time, how many companies out there to stop or try to remove CrowdStrike? CrowdStrike is that they are the endpoint detection and response software. And then during that time is the golden time for the bad actor to act. So how many things has been stolen, or what other cyber attack has been done? The repercussion of that, I think we have weeks to come to see. So, and then the third one is that what the whole EDR, the endpoint detection and response software, actually represent. Because for it to be effective, if not CrowdStrike, is what it represents, is what other software is in that. And then that's it. Potentially, it could be an insider threat. It's about a trust insider. If it's a malicious act, it is a good lessons learned. So I think that is what to watch. That's what could possibly happen attacking the EDR type of software. So I think that will be interesting in the coming months, and then how the company now to add on these lessons learned to make it resilient.
Yeah,
the thing is, anything that's an alternative to CrowdStrike, given the current system structure, anything that's an alternative to CrowdStrike will still have to work the same way, which means it'll have to have kernel access, which in theory, I thought that was supposed to be signed by Microsoft, wasn't it? Kernel patches.
No, so they said that it is Microsoft, but then Microsoft defense is that because of the EU, they make it more competitive. So they let it was making the law.
That's right,
but
that's
open. Yeah.
That's what you call it, bollocks, isn't it? That's yeah. So so anything that works like anything that's an alternative to CrowdStrike will have to work like the same kind of way. There's no way of getting around that. So Peter's point about resilience is we need more of a
it's vanishingly difficult. Yeah, it's vanishingly difficult to have two of those kinds of systems in any one infrastructure.
Yeah, but that's why having two completely separate infrastructures is probably, is probably the right way forward there. Well, so the thing the point about the point about you're talking about deep agents, and how do you know that this was just management incompetence and not? Have you guys ever seen that movie, The Manchurian Candidate, with Frank Sinatra? One of the best movies of all time, without a shadow of a doubt.
I don't know about best movie of all time, but it was pretty good. It's a worthy watch.
It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. And it's Angela Lansbury, isn't it? Plays his mother in it. And I think in reality, she was about 2 years older than him, and she plays his mother.
Back to topic. We're running out of time.
But the point is,
it's another webinar.
The idea is, that the guy is like hypnotized, and then he goes back, and then he gets activated. So, you could say like, how can you tell it's management incompetence and not the Manchurian Candidate? Well, you can't from the outside. It's just, I kind of go with the Occam's razor kind of thing. So it's always a cock up rather than a conspiracy, in my opinion.
We're coming into I can't say that. You know what? I'm going to try conspiracy theories. If I say it fast, you can't hear that. I can't pronounce it. Second, Hong Kong. We covered a few different topics since we came to you last, but a bit interested in this with bad actors and fraud, but also how has the discussion been internally afterwards in all this? Was it anything else that happened? Could it have been encrypted data that was taken? What was what is the discussion of making changes to protocol? It sounds like you were well prepared, but has it come up like, let's look over resilience again?
Yes, definitely. Looking at resilience is always a good idea. This incident definitely gave us a new scenario to evaluate and then maybe measure ourselves where we stand. Having said that, it was not all bad news, right? So this incident also helped us brush up our preparedness in case of such incident happening. So on Friday, when out of the 1,000 users in the processing center, 50 were out, immediately our backup plan of people system unavailability kicked in. And because there was no impact to payments, it also helped us measure ourselves that our current backup plans worked. And at the same time, when a main server working on, say, some Windows related went out, then our current plan of the disaster recovery server kicking in, it also worked, right? So we were able to evaluate that our current protocols are working. Yes, coming to this incident, it definitely gave us a new scenario to evaluate. But at the same time, looking at how we performed and almost nil impact to payment processing, we can also proudly say that our current backup plans worked, right?
Yeah.
Looking at the industry, yeah. Go ahead,
That's a super good point. Thank you for making that point. I mean, let's not be negative about our industry. I mean, by and large, the payments industry works pretty well. Payments stay up most of the time. And when they don't work, like when Chaps fell over a couple of weeks ago, it generally isn't because of, sabotage by foreign powers and so on. So it's quite comforting. But I would say going forwards, though, I mean, it's been a sort of useful warning to us. But you kind of feel, will people really translate this into action? Because when you go and say, okay, actually, we need to do a review of our resilience, or especially in banks, I mean, whoever's in charge is going to be like, I don't know, I don't want that coming out of my Christmas bonus, so just leave it. When it goes down, eventually it'll be somebody else's problem, so I'm not that bothered. There is that kind of, when you ask for money for security and resilience and this kind of thing, we've all been there, guys. You do come up against this barrier. So it's great that we are as resilient as we are, but we're not perfect. But how to get that next, it's easy to say it, but in real organizations, it's quite hard to sell it.
Risk managers like to work on this graph that is, what's the likelihood and what's the impact, and that all the way up and to the right.
What's the impact?
We tend to ignore that tiny triangle way up to the right, because the likelihood is so low and the impact is so high, we don't even know what we would do if this happened. And this almost falls into one of those situations. I'm sorry,
on top of that,
you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that the risk is owned by the business owners, usually, separate from the risk owners. Risk kind of people are defining the risk and kind of calculating that. So that is another aspect of silos, which might change the dynamic a bit later.
But that's about that tiny triangle and who owns it comes very close to home what we're talking about in the quantum safe cryptography working group. Like 10 out of 10 business owners within banks that I speak to say that they are not interested yet, because it's just too big of a problem to tackle. And if it happens, when it happens, we think it will happen, but we all urge, like, prepare now and again come together. How can we coordinate the defense? So on that note, somebody or in some discussion I had this week was like, should regulators do more? Should regulators get involved in resilience and resilience planning, and for organization to be more transparent on what they have in place? So I'm just going to go through all of them.
Well, they have here, because, in Europe, we've already got what they call DORA, the DORA, digital something. Is it Resilience Act or something?
Operational
Yeah.
resilience.
That's the sort of thing I should know, actually, isn't it? But you know,
Yeah. Why am I telling you?
I know it's Europe. You know, it's like it's not really my. But yeah. So here the regulators have done that, and there are all sorts of procedures that you know, certainly financial institutions will have to follow to show that they've at least consider. I mean, I don't know if they actually have to do anything about it, but they certainly have to consider, you know, and they have to, to May's point, you have to have the plans in place for recovery and backup and all that sort of thing. So here the regulators have already started to get involved.
But the question is, should they do more? So I know not all markets are, but in general. So I just want to, yep, you go, Peter.
I was going to say, here in the United States, there was a memorandum that was circulated by Bloomberg that the OCC has identified that 11 of the 22 banks that they regulate have insufficient or weak cybersecurity. And, you know, so the regulators are looking for it, but they don't know what they're looking for. I think one of the reasons that this problem was kind of caused this initial reaction of, oh my gosh, is it a nation state actor? Is it a solar flare? Is it some terrible problem? Is we just didn't know. We didn't expect that something like this might happen. And so I am always wary of regulatory whack-a-mole, meaning I'm going to pass a regulation for something I think might happen, and you have to spend a lot of money figuring out how to address it. And so I do think that prudent regulation that puts the onus on the organizations to think through things like this, that's some of what DORA does. It's some of what the NIST cybersecurity framework here in the United States does. But putting the onus on organizations, and I think that this is a good outcome of this exercise, is it will give the risk managers a little bit more money to do a little bit more forward thinking on where are these kinds of exposures. But I'm not a fan of trying to regulate against a problem like this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be a good extension. So what we've seen in Australia, for example, APRA is rolling out the CPA 230, which is emphasizing the operational risk. So I think similar to DORA, but also focusing on the third and the fourth party. So I think in this digital world, no company can be standalone without their supply chain and third party and the partners. So it's that how can we, again, build that trust and we see it together. And also the other thing, I think from the payment perspective, perhaps like BIS have this PFMI, the Principle for Financial Markets Infrastructure. And the last update was 2012. So perhaps there may be something that's globally can look at to update, because that was before cloud. Like now 2024 is in a very different world from the technological advancement perspective. So it's like, what are the principles that from the PFMI perspective that can become more global, more modern, and more relevant?
So what's interesting with all those like plans and things often, and we went through this a lot during COVID because so many markets all markets went more digital, but in Southeast even more so when people went from cash to digital payments in the first place. And it was often fintech providers or paytech providers that offered those services, and they were still, I shouldn't say too young and too small, but they hadn't put enough emphasis on cybersecurity because they were just new to the game and they hadn't been in the regulated world long enough. So do you think if we demand too much, that we also crowd out certain areas of innovation because it gets too costly for those companies to actually get on board on it? Or could it be regulators and communities' role to provide that sort of best practice that is easy to implement, even if you don't have a team to do it?
I think the point about the best practice is well taken, but I would think for most financial institutions, they know what that best practice is. I don't think.
But I talk about closer to customer. Actually, I had no doubt that the financial institutions knows it. But if we look at the innovators on top of those, so those who often are closer to the newly digitally included.
So Camilla, I'm thinking, let's look at the wallets, right? And okay, I'll again look at Singapore. I mean, there's a wider phenomenon here, but if you think about just the stats, but remember, right? So 2017 in Singapore, 40% at POS was cash usage, and 4% was mobile wallets. Come about 2023, last year, it was 15% cash and 22% mobile. And the projection is by 2027, 7% cash and 44% mobile. So obviously there's already a robust kind of legislative and directional guidance and audits and everything in place for mobile wallets to flourish, right? And within the banking sector and the non-banking sector. So that already exists. There's full regulatory coverage for that. But essentially, what's happening is also the way risk is evolving, right? And the way the business models are evolving, the way money is evolving. I think this is where the challenge lies. And I think regulators are kind of pressed to keep pace with what's going on, right? Especially with the unregulated and regulated starts, kind of conflicting and sometimes converging together, which happens in some of these wallet cases, right? So I think that's something which definitely is an area where I think more has to be done. There's a lot of focus and effort already, but that's a space where I think regulators can potentially do more, learn more, and essentially act more proactively. And how much gets regulated as well is another question. Stable coins being one classic example, right? Is that really moving forward with MiGA coming in Europe? Is that something going to happen in Asia as well? There's a lot of disparate views on that today as well. So again, regulators are kind of following, and I think there's a lot of important decisions which are going to come through the next few years on how they manage money and these new forms of money movement.
Yeah, thank you on that. So we're almost running out of time. So I'm just going to say, all going to get a chance to say something you've been holding on and wanting to say, or please say also best practice. In the meantime, while you're thinking, no, not best practice, lessons learned, I'm just going to read out the question also. As a provider of CrowdStrike solution in bundled manner, won't it be Microsoft's responsibility to have the BCP in place? Anybody want to address that?
I'm sure your enterprise Microsoft license agreement says absolutely clearly, they have no responsibility whatsoever. If the whole thing packs up tomorrow, tough luck. There is no product liability for software. So I honestly, I mean, you can go back and review the license if you want, but I can predict what it'll say.
So I find it interesting that Microsoft CEO jumped out right away and said, "Hey, it wasn't us," right? Microsoft has this very open environment that allows a lot of third-party providers. In financial institutions, we put a lot of emphasis on third-party risk management. There is an approval process in the Microsoft universe, and certainly to touch the kernel, it's a higher level process. But after that, Ms. Financial Institution, go do your own risk management. In terms of last thoughts, I think that these kind of lightning strike events, this one, the solar flare that knocked out power in the Eastern North America region, these create a moment of opportunity for people to say, oh, what about that tiny triangle in the upper right of my risk management? What should I be concerned about? Hopefully, it opens up some conversations between the technology people and the business people, because I am certain there is not a single business person who was asked to give a risk score that said, oh, well, the kernel detector for CrowdStrike might be mangled one day. Like, they have no idea what that is. So anyway, so you're going to have an opportunity to have conversations, take advantage of that opportunity.
Right. Saket, what would you like to add?
So this is like the silver lining out of this incident is building up a resilience plan. It has always been viewed as cost, not as an investment, right? Incident like this help us articulate that in a better way, that it's not only about cost, which this resilience infrastructure will actually take up, but it's actually an investment, because if we are able to show that we have a proper resilience system in place, then consumer trust in the organization and in the payment infrastructure will grow leaps and bounds, right? Mm-hmm. Consumer will trust that, yes, I don't want to carry cash. I don't need to carry cash, because these people have shown that they are super resilient, and if something goes wrong, I can still use my mobile phone or my palm.
Right? You can come back any day, because you have a positive spin on this. I like it. So thank you very much for that. May, and then I'll come to David and Rahul.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think back to the early point about payment is a network asset. So require collaboration and trust. I think take this as an opportunity to start a conversation having started before, to enrich the conversation already started, and start to think about the third-party risk management, and also watch out from the coming months for what's the actual repercussion of that.
Yeah, I think we'll keep on talking about this for quite a while. David.
Well, I mean, look, nothing much happened. No planes crashed. I mean, it was no big deal. Nobody got hurt. I'm rather with Arthur Balfour on this one. He was the British Prime Minister 120 years ago. And Arthur Balfour famously said that, you know, most things don't matter very much. In fact, most things don't matter at all. And so, you know, let's not get overexcited about this. You know, in a few IT departments, they're going to revise the risk management strategies. Maybe a few people will start planning DORA, but, you know, it's not panic.
Okay. And Rahul.
You know, I was thinking about Y2K, you know, and I really like the comments made just now, because you know, if you remember Y2K, there's a lot of negative feelings because there's so much effort, cost, investment, time for an unknown risk, really. In this case, even though the risk was unknown till it happened, I think it's really resulted in people looking very positively at what they were missing. And I think it's indeed an opportunity, right? From a risk perspective, from a BCP perspective, from a overall interoperability perspective, right? To look at how digitally we are moving forward, payments and otherwise, right? So I look at it as a silver lining. I think it's a good knock, and for people to really look at a different facet of how risks are evolving. And yeah, it's not a Y2K. I think it's a positive. I think overall as well, to be honest. At the end of the day, it's like the coffee experience I said.
With that, I hope the positive is going to be that we have a lineup to our quantum safe cryptography working group, because we know that triangle exists, and when it's coming, we just don't know when. Please, everybody, help me with an applause for my panelists. Thank you for showing up on short notice. Super grateful. Thank you for the audience. We'll get some really juicy videos out of this. So thank you, and have a wonderful evening, morning, day, wherever you are.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks all.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.